So, Roger, hi.
Hi.
What are Mentastics for you?
What are Mentastics? This is that's a question in a lot of ways that I've been investigating for a long time since I learned about it, and working with clients and then working with myself. For me, it's a whole field of practices, all related to each other, all interdependent in certain ways, but it's a field, not just a single thing.
Can you describe those fields?
Yeah. There are some different uses. So one of the ways that we can describe the different kinds of Mentastics is by the different ways we apply Mentastics, the different situations we use them in. One of the most important is just use for myself every day as part of my self-care, that I can take some dedicated time and space for. Very much like people use a yoga practice or a meditation practice or a Tai Chi practice as part of their care for themselves, their body and their mind and their spirit. So I can use my Mentastics practice that way, in a time and space that I choose. And it doesn't require, luckily, very much time or very much space to be very, very valuable for me. Another use of Mentastics is with my clients, the way I guide them through explorations at the beginning of sessions, at the end of sessions, in the middle of sessions, that have different applications for them in their daily lives. Particular movements that would be useful for them, helping them return their body and their tissue and their manner of movement back toward what is natural for their body. I'll come back to that idea in a little bit. And then there's what I just referred to as my integrated practice, my practice that is part of other activities that I do. So the way I brush my teeth or wash my hair or wash the dishes or take a walk or sit with a friend, the way I do that is informed by these same principles, the same internal explorations. There's an important part of this Mentastics that involves understanding a process of getting into it. So when we're teaching classes in this, the process often begins by just identifying that, in fact, our minds are running in many places and moving constantly from one thing to another. We are paying attention to different things, sometimes many things at one time. Part of the first step of becoming connected to ourselves is just beginning to notice, observing what's actually happening. And along with observing it is accepting that what's happening is real. So the state of mind that I'm in, the state of body that I'm in, that's what's happening. If I'm pretending not to be that way, then I don't have any ground to work with. But if I can become honest with myself and notice, this is exactly how I am. And by the way, that practice of noticing what's real is a whole practice in itself. It's insight meditation. It's what is focused on in that particular lineage of meditation practice, is just noticing and categorizing and really sort of naming to ourselves.
What it reminds me also is Zen meditation. Does it have to do anything with that?
Well, my experience, and this may be different for different people, but my experience with Zen meditation was that it was way more structured than that. That there was a really important focus of attention that one was to bring oneself to. And I found it more. I found insight meditation more connected. It's sometimes called vipassana meditation also. More connected to Milton Trager's philosophical stance that the meditative process is a process of accepting what is and paying attention to what is. So for me, that's a beginning place in practicing Mentastics, is starting with what is. And then we can begin to shift our attention, shift the mind's attention from already what is to what could be. So we begin to, and what was kind of a genius in Milton's view of things was to make that shift with questions. So not with statements, this is how I should be, but rather, how could it be? How could this arm feel? How could this lower back feel? How could my mind be a little more easy or more clear? How could I relax in my heart? And so on. Many, many, many questions. And those questions lead us into then a whole field of various movement qualities and movement practices that have, I think, kind of two main goals. One of them is the unlocking of old patterns, the letting go of habitual restrictive patterns of movement, patterns of mind, patterns in the body-mind, patterns in the unconscious. And the other part of it then, if we can let go of some of those, even temporarily, we can then begin to practice what are natural movements. So this is what I wanted to get back to. What I mean by natural is as nature intended for me. Natural in the sense that each of my body systems and all of my body parts have a way of moving that is part of their design. Now, my design and your design are a little bit different because we're not the same height, we're not the same weight, we have different arm lengths and so on, but our design is similar because we're both human. So we both have a long, flexible spine. We both have 2 arms and 2 legs. There are human movements that are very natural for the human body. The knee, for instance, as a joint, moves primarily in one direction. When it's bent, it has a little rotational possibility, but not a lot. That's natural for the knee. Yeah? The hip joint, however, has a different natural movement. It's rotational. It's got a ball and socket. It's got lots of freedom. And we go through the body as we study it and experience all those different ways the body could move naturally if it were unrestricted by restrictive habits, by learned habits.
It sounds very playful too.
Well, it is that. There's a sincerity to the playfulness, but there's always a kind of delight that we find in discovering that we still have available to us the natural habits, and they feel so good. They feel so comfortable to our human bodies when we find our way into them and begin to practice them and begin to repeat them and begin to then eventually habituate those natural patterns.
It sounds wonderful. How can a client remember, or what makes it easier for them to do those things? Do they remember in their daily life to do what you told them in the session?
I would think they remember some, but not all, and that depends a lot on who they are and how ready their body is and their mind is for learning. It probably depends a lot on how much is going on in their lives. Other things, some people arrive in my studio very stressed out with very, very busy lives, and they don't have a lot of room to make much shift. But I think what makes it easier is that at the end of the session, when I have given them a new felt experience through my hands-on work, that new feeling is very present for them. And that is much easier to access for the next week or 2 or 3. That feeling, if I point it out to them, and they point it out to me, and we begin to talk about it and play with it a little bit, we might even develop out of that feeling some very personally significant movement for them to practice on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. Or on an irregular basis, just whenever they happen to remember.
And I heard that's called recall?
Yes. The ability of our bodies and minds to recall felt experiences is not dissimilar from our ability to remember anything else we've learned. We've learned our friend's name, we immediately remember it. And somebody we have met many times, we never forget their name. Yeah? We recall it enough, it becomes part of our long-term memory.
And what I also find fascinating is the use of images and how much easier it becomes to get to a certain movement. Is that true?
Well, for some people, visual images are really useful because they think and feel themselves through their visual sense. Other people, it's much easier for them to access a kind of auditory image, a sound image, a word image. For other people, it's easier for them to connect to the pure sensory kinesthetic or kinetic image. But there are ways of describing that too. The kinetic image of the feel of water in your hands.
Or to walk through grass with naked feet or something.
Right. Or the kinetic image of feeling yourself floating in a little rubber inner tube on a pool. Mm-hmm. That's a kinetic image.
But these are very useful tools too in the Mentastics.
Because they reach a place in the brain that is deeper and more active when we are not in our thinking, conscious, verbal language in our minds. When we've made that initial shift that I talked about, out of the busy mind and into the sensory mind, the sensory experience, then the images are deeply penetrating into this unconscious language that our body is speaking to itself all the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Roger.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful.
It was great.